So welcome everyone to those who are here a bit early. This is the Nature Conservancy webinar entitled Good Fire, Bad Fire, an Ecological Perspective. We're going to just wait for folks to shuffle in. We know we have a great sign up for this event, and we'll just give it a couple of minutes while folks filter in. Thanks. Hi everyone, this is the Nature Conservancy webinar entitled Good Fire, Bad Fire, an Ecological Perspective. We are just going to give it 1 or 2 more minutes and let all the registrants shuffle in, so stand by.
Hey, John, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm sharing correctly. So,
no, your audio's good.
Okay, good. Let's see. Let me know if you see this, John. Title slide there. Okay. Should I go ahead and start the put to the? How about that? Still got that?
Yep.
Okay.
Sam, it doesn't look clear on my screen. I don't know if you need to go off video. Or maybe it's clear on other screens. John, what does yours look like?
It is a little pixelated.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Let me try one other thing here.
So to everyone who has joined us, thank you. Just bear with us for a moment. We are trying to make sure the video quality is as good as we can get it. Thanks for your patience. Still, thanks for bearing with us, folks. We'll get this taken care of momentarily. Looks like we still have a few people filing in too. That's great. And looks like we have a couple of continents represented. Somebody from Spain. Welcome. See a familiar name, Bill Owens. Good to see you, Bill, or hear from you.
Hey, Jean, you got me now?
I do.
Okay. Don't know what happened, but hopefully I'm better now.
Gotcha.
The internet always gets weird right before a presentation starts, right?
It senses stress, of course.
It does, yeah. So what do you see now, Jean?
I see your PowerPoint, not the presentation view, but there we go. There's presentation view.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. All right. Sam, are you ready to go?
I am. Sorry about the delay. I don't know what happened, but the wireless kind of went haywire there for a minute, but I should be good now.
Great. All right. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the 5th in this series of live webinars offered by the Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy. This webinar is entitled Good Fire, Bad Fire, An Ecological Perspective. And you'll hear the story of how, and just as importantly, why, TNC utilizes controlled burning as an important tool for conservation. I'm Jean Lorbert. I'm a conservation scientist with the chapter, and I'll be your MC for today. Let me take a moment to cover some logistics before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, so you'll be able to revisit any information you'd like to hear again. And you can also share the link afterwards with anyone else who may be interested. During the presentation, we can't see or hear you, but we would love to hear from you. So you can submit questions through the Q&A button, which our team will monitor and share with the presenter to answer live after the presentation. So to find the Q&A button, even though we're all probably Zoom pros at this point, if you want to find the Q&A button, move your mouse and look to the bottom of your screen. Several options should appear, including a Q&A icon. Click it and submit your questions there during the presentation if you have any. We'll get to as many as we can, and we'll also include Sam's responses to all the questions in a follow-up email. Don't please submit your questions via the chat function. Use the Q&A. We'll use the chat function for links, helpful links that our team might share at the end of the presentation. So with those logistics covered, I'm going to hand it over to our State Director, Locke Ogans, who will introduce herself and our speaker. Locke.
Thank you. And thank you for the comment about the bright window. I've got to figure out how to fix that. So I'm just tilting my my screen a little bit. I hope it helps some. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar. You know, this is Thanksgiving week, and I am so thankful for the opportunities that we have to share the good work our team is doing, not only in Virginia, but beyond there with all of you. And before I introduce our speaker for today, I want to note that our next webinar is scheduled in the new year, hopefully a better year 2021, on Thursday, January the 14th at noon. And I hope you'll save that date. During what can be a bleak month of January, we're going to be partnering with our colleagues to the south in Belize and the Bahamas to talk about blue carbon sequestration with seagrasses, mangroves, and marshlands. So please plan to join us and learn more. But today we're going to talk about TNC's prescribed fire program here in the Virginia chapter, and we've got a great discussion for you all. During what we affectionately call fire season, our staff works hard across the state and actually beyond as well to return fire to landscapes where it was once a natural part of the ecology of the land. Our program in fire requires a high level of training and skill and coordination and experience. And Sam Lindblom, who is here today, is going to tell you why it's one of the most critical conservation tools that we have. Sam is our fire program manager, and he's also the director of land management for our Virginia chapter. And I'm pleased to say, because he's such an awesome person, that he just celebrated his 25th year with the Nature Conservancy. And he's also a recognized leader in our fire work across the country and across the Conservancy. Sam started his TNC career after graduating from Auburn University with a degree in ecology and conservation biology. And he's worked in the mountains of North Carolina and on TNC's global fire team. Currently, he manages a team of TNC staff and partners, which you'll learn more about, to implement ecosystem restoration, fire ecology, and preserve and easement management in Virginia. So thank you, Sam, for your leadership and all you bring to our chapter, and the floor is yours. Go for it.
Thank you so much, Locke. I really appreciate the kind introduction, and thanks, John, for managing all of this and folks behind the scenes for being a part of it. And I want to thank everybody for showing up today. I know we have a lot of people here, so make sure you type in your questions and we'll try to get to them. I'm really excited to talk about fire. As my colleagues know, this could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I'll try to keep it to 25 or so minutes. The talk today is going to give you a little bit of an overview of why we are conducting fire management or controlled burns in Virginia, a little bit of a history of how we got to where we are now and where we're headed in the future. The first thing I'll talk about is some basic definition. So what is wildland fire? We refer to fire, wildland fire in our wildlands, as an ecological disturbance that affects the temperate climate zones of the world. So fire in the poles and in the tropics is not a normal disturbance. It occurs occasionally, but it's very, very rare in the poles and in the tropics. But in the temperate climates and the two temperate belts on this earth, there is a lot of fire, and fire was a part and has been a part of those ecosystems for many, many, many thousands of years. We put wildland fire in the category of disturbances similar to other things you might be familiar with, including windstorms or ice damage, floods, other types of storms, insect outbreaks, drought events, and those sorts of things. These times we put a human context on them as we think that they're negative, but they're actually quite important. We know that tropical storms, for example, are very, very important for coastal ecology. Without that moisture from time to time, those systems really don't do well. So fire is in that category. One of the big differences, though, with fire is it's one of the only natural disturbances that we significantly manipulate. And what I mean by that is that we actively suppress fires, we actively light fires, we do all sorts of things associated with fire that we don't really do with other natural disturbances, and that will come to play here in just a minute. In Virginia and most of North America, and certainly throughout the United States, our ecosystems are a product of our history, of their history. How much history, like how long? We're talking about several to many generations of forest canopies, and likely thousands and thousands of years. Our ecosystems are also include types of history, right? So we have climate history. So that we know we're in a changing climate, but we have the history of weather that we've had over the last couple thousand years and beyond. We also have these disturbances that I referred to earlier, and then management. So our ecosystems are definitely a product of our historical management, both historical, and this is a picture of some Native Americans igniting fires, and we know that that's been going on for thousands of years, and contemporary management, things like logging that has, and other types of land disturbances. I want to stop for a second and talk about the case for fire and how we know that that fire has been a part of our ecosystems for thousands of years. In the more contemporary, like in the last, let's say, several hundreds of years along the East Coast or in the mountains of Virginia and the coastal plain, there's one way that we determine how frequently and how important fire was as a shaper of our ecosystems. So you'll see this picture in the bottom center there. That's a pitch pine cross section from a place called Kelly Mountain, which is in Big Levels. And if you're from Virginia, that's right around Waynesboro in the Sharando area. If you've been to Sharando Lake, the beautiful campsite and pond there, that's right up on top of that mountain. And what you'll see there, and it's too small to zoom in on your screen, and that's okay, but what you should notice is that tree is curling over. We call that the 20th century curve. We can date trees just like you can count rings. So we know that tree got its birth date in the 1800s. And every time there was a fire that was hot enough to scar that tree, the tree would try to heal, right? So it would leave some carbon. In the top left photo, you'll see what a tree like that looks like before you slice it. That's a fallen log from the same area. And those leave a record. The trees try to heal over, And every time it leaves a deposit of carbon, and we can go back and actually we can count those individual records. And in this particular case, going back a couple of 100 years, we know that fires occurred on that mountain once every 7 years. So if you think about that, that's pretty frequent. We know that that's not as frequent as they did occur because not all fires leave scars. So dendrochronology is a big way that we find out how frequent fires occur. We also on certain types of mountains, we can actually do dendrochronology on shrubs. We've done some really neat work in Bath County where we determined that almost all of the shrubs on this one particular mountain were of the same age. And so we believe that was because of some fairly significant fires that sort of cleaned the slate and those shrubs resprouted, and therefore all those shrubs are about the same age. We have a lot of other ways to research the presence and frequency of fire. Pollen core studies are pretty neat. So the way pollen core studies work is we know if there are widespread fires, that sends out some smoke, and that smoke deposits on the tops of ponds. So there are a few ponds and bogs in our area, and that sediment will then settle down into the pond, and you can actually take a plug or a core, and you can actually go back and carbon date that, and that has helped us figure out that fires have been occurring for many, many thousands of years. So the resolution of the pollen core studies is really poor, but it gives us a much longer period of time. You can also at the same time figure out, that's a charcoal study, but the pollen core, actually we can go back and say, well, these types of trees were on the landscape at the same time. So we know whether these were conifers or whether they were hardwoods, and in some cases we can actually get down to the species level. We have a lot of Native American practices and accounts that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and those accounts, when this country was being settled, those records were kept, and we know what the landscape looked like. So that most of that was a result of Native American practices. We also know the three pictures on the bottom are species that are all driven and dependent upon frequent fire. The picture on the bottom left is a really neat flower that occurs on a mountain outside of Blacksburg, Virginia. It's the only known location of this plant in the world. That plant is particularly well known to require fire to crack open its seed pod. It will not germinate without the presence of fire. And so you figure, how did that thing persist up on the top of this mountain? Well, we're pretty confident that it exists because there was fire up on that mountain, and occasionally they would burn over that area, and there would be the Peters Mountain mallow would sprout. Bobwhite quail is a common game species, and our friends at the Department of Wildlife Resources, and I hope there's some of them on board today, they are working really hard with us and our friends to restore early successional habitat in pine savannas and things like that bobwhite quail, which was a species that used to be throughout Virginia, is declining. We know that species requires fire, or rather it requires the habitat that fire helps maintain. On the far right is a prairie species. This is smooth coneflower. These species were once fairly common across Virginia, and now restricted to the driest, grassiest places left in our mountains. Those grassy, dry places really are maintained by frequent fire, and we know that they're still around. So that tells us that fire was a part of that system. So that's sort of the history while we know that fire occurred, but now I'm gonna get into some human history. This is a fascinating story of our relationship in the United States with fire. About the turn of the previous century, around 1900 or so, as the United States was very, very busy trying to develop the country, right around the Great Depression, a lot of things were going on. As we were clearing the country, we were building our big cities in the Northeast, we were clearing land across the Southeast, and people were populating the West. We had a lot of big fires. Some of them in 1910 burned over millions of acres and killed lots of people. We know that those were a product of a lot of land clearing and railroads, and there were a whole bunch of reasons why those big fires occurred. And the United States government and the population at large decided that we just can't have this. We can't have fire ravaging our wildlands in the United States, and we can't have a thriving country if we have this fire. So have these fires. So among other things, we waged war against fire. And the things that we did back 100 years or so are really incredible to the state. So we had the Great Depression. We all know about that. And then at the same time, we were having these big fires. So right around towards the end of the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched the New Deal, and the Civilian Conservation Corps and many other initiatives of the sort came about. Camp Roosevelt, which was the very first CCC encampment, which was in Luray, just over the hill from Charlottesville, and worked in Shenandoah National Park and did so many great things, like build a lot of trails and build a lot of our state park and national park cabins around this country. Well, one of the other things they did is they hired many thousands of young men to go out and extinguish fire. We waged war against fire in this country, and we got really good at extinguishing fire. So we set up all sorts of crazy propaganda, like this thing in the bottom right. There's a picture of Smokey Bear and some baby deer with their home burning up, and a baby bear clinging to Smokey, please save me from this crazy fire. And we did this, and it turned out that Smokey became the most popular marketing campaign in American history. To this day, Smokey is more recognizable than Mickey Mouse. It's incredible. We did all sorts of other things too, like create like programs like the U.S. Smoke Jumpers. These are incredible men and women that go out into our craziest places and extinguish fires and put them out, and those programs still go today. I'm not knocking smoke jumpers, I know lots of them, but these are the types of things that we did to wage war against fire. So what is that? How does that matter? Well, it matters because when you remove fire, when you remove that historical frequent disturbance from our ecosystems, they change, they respond. And so because of that, we are seeing shifts in our forest canopy. We're also seeing shifts in our grasslands across the Great Plains. We are seeing a lot of our grasslands become forest. Those places really require a lot of fire, and they exclude trees as a consequence. And then those grasslands are very diverse and super important. So we start to see shifts in the forest canopy, and fire has everything to do with it. So fire is one of the great maintainers, one of the only disturbances largely removed from a lot of our ecosystems. So the effect that has is that the species that are invading or that are moving into the places that we've excluded, the species that are sensitive to fire, or put another way, thrive in the absence of fire. Those are starting to move into our systems. We're not opposed to those species. We just want them to be in their proper place in various places. So what is the Nature Conservancy doing about this? In 1962, the Nature Conservancy conducted its very first prescribed burn in a prairie in Minnesota. We studied that fire extensively and realized that not only do we need to have fire here, but we need to have fire in the southeastern coastal plain, and we need to have fire in the beautiful redwood forest in California and many other places. In Virginia, we came around a little bit longer, but we started to realize that we've got some of these incredible places too. I'm going to talk about two of those places now. So we're going to talk about the southeastern coastal plain. So this is southeastern Virginia, and generally we consider that to be south of the James River and east of Interstate 95. So the coastal plain, eastern coastal plain of Virginia. I'll show a map in a minute that gives you a better perspective of where all of that is. And then in a little bit, we'll talk about the central Appalachians and southern Blue Ridge. Again, this is a picture of our Piney Grove Preserve outside of Waverly, Virginia, a place we're very proud of, and I'll talk about that for a bit now. What we're looking at now is the historic range of longleaf pine in the United States. It used to occupy many hundreds of millions of acres, and now it's less than 1 million acres. And most of that has to do with land conversion and the changes in pine management in the southeastern United States. If you look in the top right corner of that picture, you'll see the little bitty part that I was referring to, sort of east of 95 and south of the James. That's what we have left. That's the area of southeastern coastal plain where longleaf pine was a major presence. We know longleaf pine sort of made its way onto the eastern shore and even a little bit further north and west than this picture. But the biggest concentration was south and east of the James River. So in the southeastern coastal plain, fire is the most single important regular disturbance that shaped this community of plants and animals found here. The regime, so we refer to fire, the way that fire interacts with a landscape as its fire regime. So the fires in the southeastern coastal plain were frequent and chronic. Frequent meaning they happened all of the time. So there was a lot of fire in the southeastern coastal plain on average of 1 to 3 or 4 years. It's very, very frequent. And chronic. Chronic meaning it doesn't go away. It's been doing that for thousands of years. So that natural disturbance at that frequency and that consistency really shaped the species. Such though that that many species have evolved adaptations to cope with that fire or to live with fire. Some became dependent upon the fire for their very survival. Here's some really neat photographs, some rare plants and animals. The top left picture is a beautiful picture of our Piney Grove Preserve with lots of grasses in the understory. You can go visit this place. We'd love for you to see it. The other pictures are other species, including our beloved red cockaded woodpecker, one of the first endangered species listed in the Endangered Species Act. We're restoring that species and its habitat at our Piney Grove Preserve and other places in Virginia. We're really proud of that place. And we're working with a lot of our great partners like the Division of Wildlife Resources and Division of Conservation and Recreation to make that happen. Lots of other agencies play a part in this place, the Department of Forestry and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, among others. There's some here's a neat photograph of some pitcher plants. This is not at Piney Grove. This is further south of there, but these pitcher plants are carnivorous plants, and they live in these sandy soils that have very poor nutrition, and as a consequence, they make all sorts of insect traps to catch their own protein. Southeastern coastal plain is a magical place, and we love doing firework down there because it makes such a difference in the success of that system. Here's another picture of a red cockaded woodpecker. This is sort of our flagship species. We're really proud of these guys. At one point in Virginia, there were very, very few of them left. We started conducting fire management and timber management to restore that system, and we're now very happy to say that we have actually met the endangered species recovery plan for this species in Virginia, and we're growing that population beyond the boundaries of our Nature Conservancy Preserve onto other neighboring protected lands as well. So we're really proud of that. I think I heard that Bill Owens was on this call. Bill's a great friend of ours. He's a private landowner, also in Sussex County, and he's doing some really fascinating work with longleaf pine. And I'll call Bill out right now and say, I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about that. I'm going to move over to the mountains now. So in general, I'm speaking about things west of Charlottesville and west of so the Blue Ridge and the Central Appalachians and Southern Blue Ridge. This is a photograph of our Warm Springs Mountain Preserve in Bath County, another place we would love for you to visit. Lots of public land out there, lots of opportunities to do some really neat research. I'm going to talk about two ecosystems. There are many, many ecosystems, ecological components in the Central Apps. I'm really only going to focus on the two that are driven by fire. So we're going to talk about our dry pine ridges. So that photo on the left is I believe that's a Virginia pine. I'm not totally sure about that. And the picture on the top right is a ridgeline system, and you'll see pink lady slipper. That's a really beautiful flower that you see in late spring. They pop up, and everybody's always hunting to see lady slippers. They really require a lot of sunlight. The only way you get that sort of sunlight on those ridges is to have open canopy, and open canopy is often driven by fire. The bottom right photograph is a picture at our Warm Springs Mountain Preserve of the Bear Loop burn unit. So that's we have a hiking trail that wraps around Bear Loop. Again, we'd love for you to go visit. You can learn more about that on nature.org. And if you look very carefully, you got to squint maybe a little bit. You'll see those oak trees on the right. You can see them, right? Because there's a little bit more of an open canopy. Well, the very same habitat is on the left side of that road, and you can't see very far in there. We've actually burned the right-hand side about 4 times. So we're starting to see a lot of wildflowers, a lot of grasses, and we're seeing a more open canopy in that unit. And on the left, we haven't been able to burn at all because there's some complications on that side that we haven't been able to conquer yet. That's the sort of change that we're looking for. We're not looking to eliminate forest. We're not looking to kill a lot of trees, but in some cases, we need the forest to see a lot more sunlight on the floor. So that picture I just showed is illustrated by this slide. So this is some data that we took about 15 years ago. And if you look on the left side, the left graph there, these are canopy trees. So if you can imagine hiking up to hiking on a trail off the Blue Ridge Parkway, and these are the big canopy trees that you see. So we know that today about 64% of those canopy trees are in oaks in general, right? So that's a broad characterization, and your mileage may vary depending on where you are. But in general, about 65% of those are in various oak species: white oaks, chestnut oaks, red oaks, things like that. About 12% of those canopy trees are in pines. And when I say pines, I'm excluding white pines, and I'm only really thinking about the yellow pines, pitch pines, Table Mountain, things like that. And 24% are in other. So these are all the other species like basswoods and poplars and gums and maples and a variety of other things. Now contrast that to the sapling trees. So these little babies under 10 centimeters, so the little ones. And you'll see a very, very different picture. So only 13% of the regenerating forest is in oak, and there is virtually no pines, no yellow pines regenerating. And there is a whole bunch of other. So while, again, we're not opposed to those other trees, we know that we are losing our oaks and pines, and those are really, really critical for the success of those ecosystems. And fire drives a lot of that distinction. We know that oaks and pines are very adapted to fire and do well in a fire environment. So I'm gonna run through a couple of things that we know, or rather that we believe. As a scientist, I'm very careful about suggesting that we have all the knowledge. We believe and we feel very strongly that fire's been a part of this landscape for thousands of years, and that most species in the Central Alps are well adapted to fire, and many are dependent. We know that our oak and pine communities are declining. That's pretty easy data to collect. What we don't know, however, is the impact of changes in the last 100 years. There've been a lot of things: chestnut blight, deer population changes, the changes in our climate, habitat fragmentations like communities and farms and roads, and all sorts of things that impact the movement of fire, among other things. We don't know how frequently fire burn data, and that helps us out a lot. We have some questions there. A couple other questions that are less important. We're not sure how intense all the fires were. That doesn't really matter too much because we know there was a lot of fire. We also are unclear about the relative contributions of human ignitions and lightning. Again, that might not matter so much. We just know that there was a lot of fire. I'm going to pause for just a second to do a little check-in with Jean. John, I got a little notice that said my internet was unstable. Can you hear me okay?
I heard you just fine. You cut out for a couple of words after when you were talking about the pre-settlement, but it was a minor blip. So I think you're okay from my vantage point.
Okay, great. All right, cool. Just pipe in, Jean, if I get pixelated or get weird, okay?
Will do.
Okay, thanks. All right, here's a few pictures of our fire operations. So what are we doing here in Virginia? We are carefully executing prescribed fires and monitoring results. Locke mentioned in the intro that there's a lot of training and expertise required. I've been doing this for about 25 years, or actually a little bit longer, because we were doing fires in college too, but it takes a long time and a lot of practice and a lot of training to make sure that we do this right. We don't just randomly go out there and light fires. We actually plan them out. We plan out the wind, we plan out the smoke behavior, the relative humidity, the fuel conditions, the available resources, all sorts of things. So we have very, very carefully planned out operations. Here's some really neat pictures of some of our fire operations. We have worked with a lot of really neat organizations like AmeriCorps NCCC. So we've had lots of crews. A picture in the top right is a young man that helped us on the fire line for an entire season. These allow young people to get experience on the fire lines. We also participate and help out with local wildfires. The bottom left picture is a picture of our fire manager in southeastern Virginia, Bobby Klotz, on one of the big fires in Dismal Swamp that happened in 2007. And some pictures on the right are just some operational pictures of helicopters and things called drip torches, which is the way we actually ignite some of our fires on the ground. Here's a picture of a helicopter operation. So you'll see me in the top right there. I'm in the front seat of the helicopter, helping figure out what exactly we're going to do. And we're talking to the pilot. This is Nicola. She is one of the most competent pilots and talented pilots. You'll hear a video from her in just a minute. And my buddy Herbie, who's now retired, but he worked for the U.S. Forest Service. He was a specialist in aviation and fire management. Now, this is the picture of us over in Bath County in the helicopter doing an aerial ignition. So you'll see a picture of that, a video of that right now. So what I'm going to show you now is just how this works on a big scale. So this is Back Creek Mountain, which is in Bath County. The top left there, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving around, but that's our Warm Springs Mountain Preserve. And just one ridge over to the west is West Virginia. So I'm gonna play this little video. It's about a minute long. What you're gonna see is the helicopter flying around, and you'll hear the chatter between the pilot and myself and Herbie about what we're doing. So you're gonna see that this fire is just slowly moving down the slope in a very controlled manner. It looks like a lot of flames, but it's those flames are about 2 to 4 feet tall in general. We'll see those in just a minute. So what you should be looking for in the middle of the screen is some little black dots. So those are the little balls that fall out of the helicopter and ignite about 30 seconds later. In just a second, you'll see some actual flames coming into view. You should see those just about now. There we go. In the middle of the screen, you should see some little dots. And those fires will run up and hit the backing fire and continue to move down the slope. This is a very successful burn in this place now. We've been up and done a lot of monitoring for, and we're seeing a lot of great ecological response here. A lot of pines, a lot of oak regeneration, a lot of really interesting wildlife coming in. So we are chatting about what we're going to do and how we're going to execute this safely, and we're in contact with the folks on the ground too, so we know what's going on. That was a great fire. That was in the spring, I think 2 years ago, maybe in April, more than likely. So some new stuff that's going on we're really excited about. So drone technology. So we now have a new drone, a really large drone. It's actually pictured in the left side of the screen there from DJI, which is a really neat drone company, and a small company out of Nebraska makes a little, what we call the PSD, a plastic sphere dispenser. And it drops those little balls out of the drone and does the same thing that a helicopter can do on a smaller scale. So the right-hand side is us doing some route planning. So the tablet talks to the drone, and that's the map of where we're going to do the ignition. And that drone, you can also see, you see a little orange glow in the right-hand side of that tablet. We actually have the ability to do infrared photography, so we can actually see where the fire is burning or still smoldering, and we can see through the smoke and at night through fog, and it's really incredible technology. I've got a little video of that drone I'll play real quick.
Hey Sam, before you share,
Yep.
make sure to also share the audio.
Ah, okay. Did that audio not come through a minute ago?
Not the first video, no.
Uh-oh. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna reshare. Should I go back, John? You tell me. And
No,
do that other video?
No, we don't need to see the first video again. Just
okay.
It's fine.
I'm sorry about that, folks. Okay. Here's a little video of our new drone. That's a pretty big drone. That thing is about 3.5 or 4 feet across. It's one of the largest commercially readily available drones that you can buy. We're really excited about that technology and what it's going to do for firefighter safety and the reduction of risk. So we have licensed drone pilots. We work with the FAA to make sure that we have clear airspace and all those sorts of things. So lots of training involved in that too. Think to scale through partnerships. I can't go any further. In fact, I probably should have talked about this even more earlier. We couldn't do any of this work without our friends. We have a lot of friends here, and some of them I know are on the phone. The Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, which is now known as DWR, the Division of Wildlife Resources. The U.S. Forest Service is a huge partner, the Virginia Department of Forestry, the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and our friends at the Department of Conservation and Recreation, specifically Natural Heritage and State Parks. These are friends, and we have private landowners that work with us across the state. we all have to do this work together. None of us have the resources to get it done together. There's a lot of reasons we do that. We work with our partners to make the most of our available resources in science. We collaborate together on all sorts of things, from U.S. Forest Service large-scale planning to implementation of burns on state game lands and natural heritage sites. We also do a lot of communications. We make sure that we're sort of saying the same, we're singing from the same sheet of music. So when you hear me talk about fire, it's a similar message that you might hear from, let's say, the Department of Wildlife Resources or our private landowners. We work really hard to make sure that our science is real and we make sure that our communication is good. We plan at large scales with our partners. It's much more efficient to do that way. We conduct burns across boundaries. It would be crazy for us to conduct burns right at the property boundary of a national forest when we could just extend that into the national forest and make the burns safer. That's a very common thing that we do. And I'll close to say, we couldn't do this without you. We couldn't do this without community support, our agency support, and the Nature Conservancy being willing to take the risk and help us conduct these fires. We're real proud of our program here. And with that, I think I'll close out and open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Sam. We have a ton of questions that have been pouring in. So you either did something really good or really bad. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll find out. Hey, should I leave this on? Should I leave this screen up or stop that?
You can stop sharing. That's fine in case you need to toggle, in case you feel compelled to toggle back and forth to a specific slide to answer a question. But
okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So the first question we're going to get to is, how polluting is burning? How do you deal with the smoke from a burn? Is there an impact to local communities?
Great. So there's a handful of things there, and John, keep me honest. We do a lot of, that's a great question. Thank you so much. We do a lot of planning for smoke. So several things. We're very conscious of where the smoke from a prescribed burn will go, and we're very conscious about how long it will last. So one of the things that we monitor is how much fuel, and when I say fuel, that's a technical term for sticks and twigs and grass. So we make sure we know, based on the humidity and the moisture, how long it's been since it's rained, we know about how much fuel is going to burn, and that ties us to our objectives. When we know how much fuel is going to burn based on the weather conditions or the fuel conditions, we then have a much better idea of how much smoke will be released. Then we go to the site specific or the day weather. So we look at things like the atmospheric mixing height, which is essentially so if you're driving along and you see a smokestack from a factory, the smokestack, if it's during the middle of the afternoon on a beautiful sunny day like it is here where I am, and the smoke travels up and then it might level off somewhere, that's the mixing height. So that's how far up smoke or air will lift that particular day. So we have minimum standards for mixing height. So that smoke will go up and hit what we call the transport or the mixing height or the transport winds, and then that will disperse. So we're really, really careful. Sometimes we miss it. I can't tell you that we are 100% accurate, but 99% of the time or something like that, we're pretty good at predicting where smoke is going to go. So you asked about pollution. There is no question that smoke emits or that fires emit particulates that you can see. A lot of that smoke that you saw in those photographs is actually made up of water vapor. So the vast majority of smoke, visible smoke, is actually water vapor. There are particulates. So, and those particulates settle down, and there is, in an ideal world, in a magical sort of mythical world, none of that would ever go into the atmosphere. But we know that you sort of can't have one without the other. You can't have these ecological systems that are in good shape and not have fire as part of it. So we understand and know that fire and smoke, therefore, is sort of part of that system. That may not be the answer you were looking for, but smoke is part of our world and part of our natural system, and it just happens.
Gotcha. Thanks, Sam. All right, let's move on to the next one. So have you ever tried burning wavy leaf basket grass? And kind of overall, can fire be used to control invasive species?
Right, great question. We haven't tried fire on wavy leaf basket grass, mostly because that species tends to occur in places that aren't very fire prone. Unfortunately, for a lot of invasive species, particularly grasses, almost every grass species in the planet, not all of them, but almost all grass species really respond positively to fire. So in the case of something like wavy leaf basket grass, a species that we really don't like, well, we don't like it here. It's certainly an invasive species and does some pretty rough things to some systems. Fire tends to actually promote those. So we often are very, very careful about where we burn to not increase the spread of invasive species. So grass is often, that's a tough thing with fire. You got to be willing to take that, to take the potential spread of invasives in some cases. We do manage some invasive species with fire. And in some cases it is helpful.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. So here's a question. I saw a video a couple years ago about W-Trex. Can you talk more about women in fire, and is TNC encouraging this? So first, Sam, what is W-Trex?
Sure. So we'll talk. The Nature Conservancy, with all of our partners that I mentioned earlier, and many, many more across the country and even across the globe, have been doing these things for the last decade or so, called the Training Exchange. So the Fire, TREX, Training Exchange, Training EX, Training Exchange. Well, we realized that, and this is no surprise, that that we need a higher level of diversity for all sorts of great reasons in our fire culture. So a lot of great women, some of which are in our chapter, have organized women-focused, the W-Trex, the Women in Fire, and they've conducted a whole number of these similar training exchanges where women have gone and have been able to get a lot more leadership and skill development, and it's really a phenomenal thing. It's not to the exclusion of men, but it's just focused on empowering women in this field and giving them greater opportunities for fireline leadership. And we're real proud of that program. And Nicole Simmons, I don't know if Nicole's on the phone here, but Nicole has been driving that work for us. And Nicole works out of our Allegheny Highlands program.
Great. No, that's an incredible program. I'm glad TNC is.
Hopefully there'll be a link about that.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, next question. How do you know when it's okay to burn? Is it safe?
Great, awesome question. I mentioned earlier about the planning. So we are very careful. We do a lot of planning. First of all, we identify at the beginning of the year, this time of year, sort of when we are thinking about our spring and summer burn season, we identify what we call the units, the landscape parcels. There we have a perimeter around like water or roads or those sorts of things that we're going to burn. And from there, we develop objectives, how much we want to burn, how intense we want that fire to be, those sorts of things. And then we develop what's called a prescription. That sounds really technical, but really what that means is it's a set of parameters: wind speed, direction, fuel conditions, the amount of resources we need. Do we need the drone, or do we need a helicopter, or these many fire engines, or whatever? All of those things have to play out. So we look at the weather, and if the weather works, we have to make sure we have resources. And if we have resources, we have to make sure we have the amount of time in the day and all sorts of other prescriptive parameters. And only when we are within prescription will we conduct that fire. We don't just burn randomly. We only burn when we're in prescription, and that's really, really well planned. So that's how we do it.
Thank you. Okay, so next question. Do you experience much pushback from local people when you choose to do a prescribed burn? And do you find that attempts at education regarding the importance of burns is very beneficial?
If we take folks to places that we have burned, we almost invariably get a positive response. The response in our natural communities to fire, if you take someone to a beautiful pine savanna or a mountain forest or a native prairie that's been restored with fire, many, many people really love that. There's lots more wildlife, lots more wildflowers, lots more diversity of plants and animals. So when you take folks there to the after effects of fire, which is what we tend to do, they almost always, not always, love the response. The idea of fire sometimes is scary, and that's understandable. We've had 100 years of talk to us about how bad fire is in our natural places. And we just know that there's sometimes bad fire, like you see in the news, that burn up communities, and we don't want that. We're not advocating for that. But there's also a lot of good fire. So we are trying to spread the message of good fire, and that's planned fire that we are under prescription. And planned fire is a fire that planned good fire is a fire where we understand where there are communities nearby. We understand the things that are sensitive to smoke, and that we organize all of that. So we make sure that we are in concert or working with our local communities. I can't tell you there's not some pushback, because there is from time to time, but it's getting less and less as we do more outreach and we conduct more science, and we demonstrate the fire success.
Thank you. All right. So here's one. Are wildlife harmed in controlled burns?
Another great question. We tend to humanize wildlife, and that's a mistake. So I talked a bit about how plants and animals, or plants in particular, were very well adapted to fire. We also know that animals are very, very well adapted to fire. Animals have been living in the same landscape that these plants have been living in for thousands of years. And almost all of them are well adapted to the presence of fire. So for example, we hear sometimes, oh, you shouldn't burn in the springtime because you're gonna burn up turkey nests, for example. So, well, yeah, there might be a turkey nest in a place that we burn, and there may be some eggs on that nest, and that nest may fail. Well, we know that turkeys will abandon that nest. We've seen this, and they fly away during the fire, and then they will come back and forage immediately afterwards in the burn unit. We've seen that we have some really incredible documentation of that. So we see turkeys and other species moving back into recently burned areas to browse and graze. And turkey, among many other birds, will simply re-nest. So the long term of that, of course, is that the habitat is better for that species. I can't sit here and tell you that there's never some mortality from fire from animals, but it is quite rare. Lots of species are burrowers. I always struggle with that word. Other species are climbers. I can remember flying in a helicopter a couple of years ago. It might have been on the same burn that I showed you a minute ago, and seeing a pack of bears move down into stream bottoms. One of the things that we're real careful about is that we don't force fire. We don't push fire into places that don't really want to burn. We ignite fires and we let them back down the slope or across the pine savanna, and then they just go out where they go out. We don't force fire into a place that it doesn't want to go, for a lot of reasons. We let the habitat dictate where that fire is going to spread. And we also want there to be places that are unburned. Those unburned places are places where wildlife often go and hang out until the fire is over, and then they move back in and almost immediately start benefiting from that fire. So there's certainly some mortality from some species, but we know through a lot of science that bird species and mammal species and reptile species and amphibians do almost invariably much better in the presence of a healthy fire regime.
Great, and that's great big picture context. Thanks. So this will be the last question. Where can we go to see the effects of burned forest?
Hello, Jean.
Yeah, can you hear me? Sam? Uh-oh. All right, bear with us, folks. Sam Lindblom. Okay, I'll let Sam jump back in if he can. But so okay, great. So the panelists are saying they can hear me, so I know my audio is okay. So Warm Springs Mountain in Bath County, our preserve that we bought back in 2002, is several thousand acres of forest that's been managed with prescribed burns. And the staff out there have taken great efforts to create a walking trail with signs kind of interpreting what has been done at Warm Springs Mountain. So that's a great place to start, is our Warm Springs Mountain Preserve, in addition to many dozens of large sites across the National Forest. So I will defer to Sam if he's back on. Just checking in here. Okay. So, so yeah, Warm Springs Mountain, great place, great walking trails, pretty easily accessible. We have a parking lot right at the top of the mountain. So that would be my top recommendation, is to check that out, the Bear Loop Trail specifically. So Sam, thank you for a great presentation overall, and we're right at our closing. And thanks for all the excellent questions, everyone. We're at our time, so if there are any unanswered questions, which I think there are, Sam will respond to those in a follow-up email. So thanks everyone for their interest, and take care. And thanks for joining us, and I'll pitch it back to Locke to send us on our way. Locke.
Thank you, John, and a lot of thanks to Sam. I'm sorry he's having his internet connectivity issues, but as you can see, he knows quite a bit about fire and is a great leader of our firework here in Virginia. And so we will definitely answer the rest of your questions. But I want to thank all of you all for joining us today. It's Thanksgiving week, so I'm really thankful for this great team of colleagues that I get to work with in Virginia. They're incredibly creative and resilient. There's Sam, he's back. I'll let him say the last word in a second. And it's just a pleasure to work with them. And I'm also really thankful for all of you on this call. You are part of our team. You are the reason that we're able to do our work, and we appreciate the support that you give us, because we couldn't do it without you. And that includes our partners on the call. I heard Sam reference them as it's a team effort, that's for sure. Just a quick reminder that our next webinar is on January the 14th at noon. And we are going to be talking about blue carbon in the seagrasses, mangroves, and marshlands of Belize and the Bahamas. So we can all pretend that we are in some nice warm place in January. We hope to see you then. And until then, I hope each and every one of you on this call has a safe and a wonderful Thanksgiving and holiday season. Please be well, stay safe, and don't forget how thankful we are for all of you all. So thank you all. Sam, do you want to say goodbye? I'm sorry we kept losing you.
I'm so sorry, folks. I don't know what happened. But anyway, I'm here. The internet just sort of vaporized me, and I'm surprised I have any hair left, because I started yanking most of it out and then it came back. I am so thankful for you all, Jean, Locke, and everybody else that sort of made this happen, and for those folks who added questions and whatnot. I'm really thankful for you too. I'm sorry to blink out like that, but anyway, thank you for being here.
Great job, Sam, and thanks again to everybody, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a wonderful holiday season. Everybody take care. Bye.